There's a moment you know too well. Someone says something small, a comment, a joke, a look, and instantly, something tightens in your chest. You replay it in your head. You wonder what they meant. You think about what you should have said. Hours later, it's still there. Not because the words were powerful, but because you took them seriously. If this feels familiar, you're not weak, you're human. But here's the truth no one ever told you. The moment someone's words make you feel guilty, embarrassed, or small, you have handed them control. Not temporarily, not symbolically, psychologically, they're gone. They've moved on. They've forgot the moment ever happened. And yet you're still carrying it. Still explaining yourself in your mind. Still trying to justify who you are. Still shrinking quietly. This is how shame works. It doesn't attack you physically, it doesn't need to. It convinces you to attack yourself. You call it being considerate. You call it being a good person. You call it self-awareness. But most of the time, it's none of those things. It's submission. Think about it honestly. Why does their opinion matter so much? What have they built? What do they risk? What authority do they actually have over your life? Usually none. And yet their words echo louder than your own goals. That's the trap. Shame doesn't come from strong people, it comes from people who feel threatened. People who can't control you directly try to control how you feel about yourself. They don't tell you what to do. They make you feel wrong for being who you are. Too ambitious, too distant, too focused, too confident. And if you react, even internally, they win. Because reaction is agreement. The moment you feel the need to explain yourself, you've accepted their right to judge you. Most people never see this. They spend years trying to prove they're good enough to people who were never qualified to judge them. They shrink their ambition. They soften their edges. They apologize for traits that make them powerful, all to avoid that feeling of being judged. But here's the part that changes everything. You are not shamed because you're wrong. You're shamed because you still want to belong. Shame only works on people who need approval. The person who no longer needs to be accepted cannot be controlled with guilt. You can't shame someone who has already decided they don't need permission to exist as they are. This is why certain people seem untouchable. Not louder, not more aggressive, just unaffected. Words slide off them. Judgments don't land. Criticism has no grip. Not because they're arrogant, but because they've stepped outside the game. They're no longer trying to prove anything. And when you stop trying to prove yourself, something dangerous happens. You become unpredictable. People who relied on your guilt lose leverage. People who controlled you with judgment lose access. People who benefited from your self-doubt feel exposed. That's why shame is so aggressively enforced by the crowd. It keeps everyone in line. But this video is not about being liked. It's about becoming unreachable. Because once you understand how shame actually works, you'll never carry someone else's words again. Not because you're angry, not because you fight back, but because you finally see the game and you refuse to play it. Before you learn how to shut shame down, you need to see why it's used at all. Because shame isn't random, it is an emotional honesty, and it definitely isn't feedback. Shame is a control mechanism. When someone tries to make you feel guilty, embarrassed, or small, they are not correcting you. They are testing you. They're running a silent scan to see one thing: do you still need my approval? That's it. Every shaming comment is a probe. You've changed. You're selfish. You think you're better than everyone now. That's not very humble. None of these are observations. They are pressure points. They are meant to pull you back into a role that makes them comfortable. Here's the pattern most people miss. Shame only appears when you step out of line. Not morally, socially. You stop agreeing. You stop explaining. You stop prioritizing others over yourself. And suddenly, the tone changes. You're no longer praised, you're questioned. Why? Because your independence threatens the group's balance. Groups don't like outliers. They don't like people who don't need validation. They don't like people who don't react on cue. They don't like people who can walk away, so they shame you. Not to help you, but to pull you back. This is why shame is always wrapped in moral language. They don't say, I feel insecure around you. They say, you've become cold. You're not the same anymore. You should think about others more. It sounds virtuous, but underneath it is fear. Fear that you no longer play by the same rules. Fear that you no longer need them. Fear that if you can step outside the herd, maybe they could have too. And that realization is unbearable. So they attack, not openly, indirectly, because direct confrontation requires courage. Shame requires none. Here's the brutal truth. You are only shamed because you still care about belonging. The moment you stop caring, shame stops working. That's why some people seem immune to it. You can insult them, judge them, label them, and it just doesn't land. Not because they're emotionless, but because they don't measure themselves by the crowd. They've already accepted that standing apart comes with noise. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives negotiating with everyone's feelings, explaining themselves, softening their edges, apologizing for ambition, and the price they pay is enormous. They stay small, because shame doesn't just control behavior, it controls identity. It tells you who you're allowed to be. Too much confidence, tone it down. Too much independence, that's selfish. Too much focus, that's arrogance. And slowly, without noticing, you shape yourself into something harmless, something manageable, something easy to control. But here's what flips the script. The people who shame you are not ahead of you. They're behind you. They're not protecting values. They're protecting comfort. Your growth exposes their stagnation. Your confidence exposes their doubt. Your refusal to apologize exposes how often they do. So they try to drag you back, not because you're wrong, but because your existence challenges their excuses. Once you see this, shame loses its mystery. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Why does this bother them so much?" That question alone breaks the spell, because the moment you realize shame is about their fear, not your failure, you stop shrinking, and the game begins to change. Here's where almost everyone makes the same mistake. Someone shames you, questions you, labels you, and without thinking, you respond, you explain, you justify, you clarify. You say things like, "That's not what I meant. You don't understand the full situation. I'm actually not like that. It feels reasonable, it feels mature," but it's the exact moment you give away your power. Because the moment you defend yourself, you've accepted their authority. You've agreed silent, have the right to judge you. Now you're not speaking as an equal, you're speaking as a defendant. And they're the judge. This is the trap. Shame doesn't need to be loud to work. It just needs you to care. The Stoics and strategists understood something most people don't. The person who explains is already beneath the frame. Why? Because explanation implies obligation. You only explain yourself to someone whose opinion you value. So when someone throws shame at you and you rush to defend, you've answered their unspoken question. Yes, you matter enough to affect me. And now they know exactly where the leverage is. Think about how often this has happened. A family member questions your choices. A colleague hints you're selfish or arrogant. A friend makes a cutting joke in front of others. You don't even argue aggressively, you just explain. And afterward, something feels off. You feel smaller, less grounded, like you lost something you can't name. That's because you did. You lost frame control. Frame control is simple. Who defines what matters? Who decides what needs explaining? Who is evaluating whom? The moment you defend yourself, you flip the roles. They become the you become the And here's the brutal part. You cannot win from that position. No explanation is ever enough for someone who is shaming you. Because their goal was never understanding. It was control. If they wanted clarity, they would ask. If they wanted connection, they would speak directly. Shame is not curiosity. It's a test. And defending yourself is failing it. This is why people who are hard to shame don't argue back. They don't rush to correct the record. They don't scramble to be seen as good. They don't feel the need. Because they've already decided who they are. Their identity isn't up for public debate. This is uncomfortable at first. Your instincts will scream, say something. Don't let that stand. Defend yourself. But here's what happens when you don't. Silence appears. And silence is unbearable for someone who expected you to break. They start to feel exposed. Why didn't you react? Did they go too far? Did they attack myths? Their confidence wavers? Because suddenly, they're the one unsure. This is the power shift. You didn't win an argument. You made them question the right to start one. And that's far more effective. Most people think power is about having the best comeback. It's not. Real power is making someone realize their attack meant nothing. That it didn't even qualify for a response. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak by choice, not by pressure. You decide when something deserves your energy, and most shaming comments don't. Once you internalize this, something changes. You stop feeling rushed. You stop feeling cornered. You stop feeling the need to prove yourself. You begin to understand a simple rule. If someone needs to shame you to feel superior, they've already told you everything you need to know. And you don't owe explanations to people who haven't earned authority. Not anymore. Once you understand that defending yourself is losing, a new question appears. If you don't explain, if you don't justify, if you don't argue, what do you do instead? This is where real power begins. Because the strongest response to shame is not aggression, it's absence. Most people think power is about dominance. Raising your voice, winning the exchange, landing the final blow. That's theater. True power is quieter. It's the ability to make someone's attack collapse on its own. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Shame only works when it has something to attach to. A reaction, an apology, a defense, an emotional shift. Take those away, and the shame has nowhere to land. It hits nothing. This is why silence is so disturbing too. People who shame, they expect friction, they expect resistance, they expect you to bend. When you don't, their nervous system panics. You can feel it in the air. The pause gets longer. Their words trail off. Their confidence cracks. Because they just revealed something vulnerable. They cared enough to attack you, and you didn't care enough to respond. That imbalance is devastating. This is what I call the vacuum. You don't push back, you don't pull forward. You'll remove yourself from the exchange entirely. And humans are terrible at dealing with a vacuum. Here's what it looks like in real life. Someone tries to shame you in front of others. They say, "You've changed. You're cold now. You're not very humble." And you don't rush to explain. You don't laugh nervously. You don't correct them. You simply look at them, come neutral, unbothered for seconds. That's all it takes. 4 seconds of silence feels like an eternity to someone who expected control. In that silence, their mind spirals. Did I misjudge them? Why aren't they reacting? Did I just overstep? You didn't say a word. And yet the power dynamic just flipped, because now they feel exposed. Shame relies on momentum. It needs your emotional cooperation to keep going. Silence kills momentum. And here's what makes this so effective. You're not attacking them. You're not embarrassing them directly. You're letting them embarrass themselves. They're the one who spoke out of insecurity. They're the one who needed to assert something. They're the one who now looks uncertain. You simply stayed still. After that pause, you have 2 options. Both are devastating in different ways. Option 1, you walk away. No drama, no announcement. You physically remove yourself as if the comment never happened. This sends a brutal message. You're not important enough to interrupt my day, people. Remember this. Not because it was loud, but because it was absolute. Option 2, you continue the conversation as if nothing was said. Change the subject, ask a neutral question, move forward. This is even colder. It tells them their attempt didn't even register as relevant. Their words didn't sting. They didn't land. They didn't matter. Both options do the same thing. They deny the shame of what they wanted most. Significance. Most people shame because they feel small. They want to feel bigger by making you shrink. When you refuse to shrink, their strategy fails. And here's the long-term effect. Once you use this a few times, people learn. They stop testing you. They stop pushing. They stop trying to provoke reactions. Not because you're scary, but because you're unresponsive. And nothing is more discouraging to a manipulator than someone they can't move. This is not cruelty. This is self without explanation. And once you understand that, silence is not weakness, but selective engagement. You stop giving your power away to people who never deserved it in the first place. Silence is powerful. But sometimes, silence alone isn't enough. Some people don't back off. They push harder. They repeat the label. They escalate. They need a reaction. Not because they're strong, but because they're desperate. This is where the next level begins. Instead of resisting the insult, you accept it. Not sarcastically, not angrily, calmly. This is the move that breaks most people psychologically. Here's why. An insult only works if you're afraid of it. If someone calls you selfish and you panic, it's because part of you fears it might be true. If someone calls you arrogant and you rush to deny it, it's because you still want to be seen as good. That fear is the handle they use to move you. So what happens when you remove the handle? You agree? Someone says, "You're selfish," and you say, "Yeah, I am," and you stop. No explanation, no defense, just stillness. Their brain freezes. Because the script they rehearsed depended on you resisting. They expected denial, justification, emotional reaction. They didn't expect ownership. When you own the label, it loses its charge. An insult is only a weapon when it's pointed at insecurity. When there's no insecurity, the weapon shatters. This is deeply uncomfortable for the other person. They wanted you to feel shame. Instead, you showed certainty. Now they don't know what to do next. This is why the most powerful follow-up is 2 words. Now what? Say it calmly, not as a challenge, as curiosity. Now what? You've just removed their leverage. They can't shame you for something you've already accepted. They can't control someone who isn't trying to be approved of. And suddenly, the spotlight flips. They're the one exposed. Why were they so invested in labeling you? Why did they need you to feel bad? What were they trying to gain? You didn't accuse them, but the question forces them to confront it internally. Most people stumble here. They backtrack. They say they were just joking. They claim they were just being honest. And that's how you know you've won. Because when someone says I was just joking, what they really mean is, I didn't expect you to be this solid. Let's look at a real example. Someone says, you've gotten really cold. Old, you would explain. New you says, yeah, I have. Pause. Now what? That's it, you didn't apologize. You didn't justify, you owned it. And by owning it, you turned it from a flaw into a boundary. Cold to who? Cold compared to what? You're no longer operating inside their moral frame. You stepped outside it, and this is frame reversal. They tried to place you in the position of the accused. You refused a role. You didn't argue your innocence. You questioned their authority to accuse. And that's a critical difference. People who shame rely on one assumption, that you still want to be seen as good in their eyes. The moment you stop needing that, they lose control. This doesn't mean you accept lies about yourself. It means you don't fight on terrain chosen by someone else. You decide which traits matter. You decide who gets access to yourself. And when you do that, shame stops working. Because shame requires participation. Without it, there's nothing left. No drama, no escalation, no power for them. Just a quiet realization on their side. This person can't be moved. And once people realize that, they either respect you, or they leave. Both outcomes are victories. By now, you've learned how to neutralize shame. You don't defend, you don't explain, you don't absorb the insult, you stay calm. You stay calm, stay grounded, you stay out of their frame. But there's a deeper level, because sometimes the goal isn't just to stop the attack. Sometimes the goal is to end it permanently. This is where you stop absorbing pressure and start redirecting it. Here's something most people never realize. Anyone who shames you is already revealing weakness. Strong people don't need to diminish others. Secure people don't obsess over your behavior. Focused people don't waste energy trying to make you feel small. So when someone goes out of their way to shame you, they've already told you something important there, uncomfortable. And discomfort always has a source. The mistake most people make is thinking they're on trial. They're not. The moment someone shames you, they just don't realize it yet. This is where you gently but decisively turn the spotlight back on them. Not with insults, not with anger, with questions. Questions are dangerous because they don't attack, they expose. Here's why this works. Shame thrives when you're defensive. Questions remove defense from the equation. Instead of explaining yourself, you ask something simple, something calm, something curious. For example, why does that bother you so much? That's it. No edge, no accusation, just curiosity. That single question shifts the entire dynamic. Because now they're the one who has to answer. They weren't prepared for that. They expected you to justify yourself. They expected emotion. They didn't expect reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable for insecure people. Here are a few other examples. Someone says, "You think you're better than everyone." You respond, "Do you actually believe that, or did it just feel good to say?" Someone says, "You've changed. You're not like you used to be." You respond, "What version of me worked better for you?" Someone says, "That's pretty selfish." You respond, "What exactly did you expect me to do instead?" Notice what's happening. You're not denying the claim. You're not accepting it either. You're asking them to explain why they made it. Most people can't because the real answer sounds bad. "I feel left behind. I don't like that you don't need me. I feel threatened. I'm uncomfortable with your confidence." So they hesitate. They stumble. They soften. And suddenly, the tone changes. This is the moment you see the truth. Shame was never about morality. It was about their emotion. Your question didn't humiliate them. It simply removed their cover. And here's the key. You must ask these questions calmly. No sarcasm, no aggression. If there's anger in your voice, you lose the advantage. Because then they can say, see, you're defensive. Calm keeps the frame. Calm signals certainty. You're not trying to win. You're not trying to hurt. You're just not willing to accept shame without understanding where it's coming from. And that alone changes how people treat you. They think twice next time. They hesitate before labeling you. Because now they know something. Attacking you means exposing themselves. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. You're not absorbing other people's discomfort anymore. You're returning it to where it belongs. And that's a critical shift. You stop carrying emotional weight that was never yours. You stop managing other people's feelings at the expense of your own. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. Then something happens quietly. Your presence changes. People sense boundaries without you announcing them. They feel that you are not easily moved. Not aggressive, not cold, just grounded. And grounded people are hard to manipulate because they don't react on command. They respond on their terms. Once you reach this stage, shame stops being a threat. It becomes information, a signal that someone is projecting their fear onto you. And instead of carrying it, you hand it back, calmly, without drama, without apology. Up to now, everything you've learned has been tactical. Silence, agreement, questions, redirection. These tools work, and they work immediately. But tactics alone don't make you untouchable. They only protect you in the moment. To end shame permanently, something deeper has to change. Your identity. Because here's the truth most people never face. You are vulnerable to shame because you're still trying to be seen as good. Good partner, good friend, good person, good member of the group. That identity sounds noble, but it's a cage. When your self-worth depends on being perceived as good, anyone can control you with guilt. They don't need to threaten you, they don't need to argue. They just imply you're failing morally, and you fold. Why? Because your identity requires approval to survive. This is why shame is so effective. It attacks the role you're trying to protect. The Stoics and strategists understood this long ago. They didn't aim to be good, they aimed to be effective. There's a difference. A good person asks, how do I look to others? An effective person asks, did I act in alignment with my values and goals? One looks outward, the other looks inward. Shame only works on outward-facing identities. Once your sense of self is internal, shame has nothing to attach to. Think about the traits people shame you for. Selfish, cold, ruthless, unapologetic, ambitious. Notice something. These are not flaws. They're threats when owned by someone competent. A selfish person with no results is a burden. A selfish person who builds, leads, and delivers is powerful. A cold person with no direction is empty. A cold person with clarity and discipline is focused. The problem was never the trait. The problem was who benefited when you didn't own it. You were trained to feel bad for prioritizing yourself because someone else benefited from your self-sacrifice. You were trained to feel guilty for ambition because it made others feel small. You were trained to apologize for confidence because it disrupted the hierarchy. That training runs deep, and until you reject it, shame will keep finding you. The untouchable identity is simple. You stop asking, am I good? And start asking, am I competent? Am I disciplined? Am I aligned? When you live from those questions, everything changes. You no longer need universal approval. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You no longer need to explain yourself. You measure yourself by outcomes and integrity, not opinions. And here's the key principle. You only take criticism from people who have earned authority. Authority comes from experience, results, alignment with where you're going. Everyone else's opinion is background noise. Not hated, ignored. This is what makes you unreachable. Not arrogance, not aggression. Selectivity. You don't engage emotionally with people who have no leverage over your future. And once people sense that, the dynamic shifts. They feel it. They stop testing you, they stop poking, they stop shaming. Because they know something now. You don't live in their moral courtroom. You don't stand trial for their comfort. You answer to yourself. And that is the final evolution. Not louder, not harder, just independent. Shame requires permission. The untouchable identity never grants it. And once you stop granting it, people either adjust their behavior or they disappear. Both outcomes serve you. At some point, something quiet locks into place. Not confidence, not arrogance, certainty. You stop wondering how others see you. You stop scanning reactions. You stop replaying conversations in your head, because the need is gone. The need to be approved. The need to be understood. The need to belong at any cost. You didn't fight it away, you outgrew it. This is what it means to become unreachable. Not invisible. Not isolated. Unreachable. Words no longer hook into you. Judgments no longer linger. Attempts to shame feel distant, almost strange. Not because people stopped trying, but because they stopped succeeding. You begin to notice the difference immediately. Someone throws a comment meant to sting, and your body doesn't react. No tightening in the chest. No heat in the face. No urge to explain. Just awareness. You see the move for what it is. A reach for control. And because you don't give it, the moment passes. This is when the power fully flips. People who relied on your guilt feel unsettled. People who controlled you with judgment feel exposed. People who expected you to fold feel confused. They sense something has changed. You're no longer predictable. You don't defend. You don't overreact. You don't shrink. And unpredictability is unsettling to those who use pressure. But here's the part most people don't expect. You also become calmer. Not tense. Not guarded. Calm. Because you're no longer managing other people's emotions. You're not carrying their discomfort. You're not negotiating your worth. You're simply moving forward. And that calm creates gravity. People start watching how you move, how you respond, how you don't respond. They begin to sense boundaries without you stating them. Respect starts appearing quietly, not from everyone. From the right people, the ones who are secure, the ones who don't need control, the ones who respect strength that doesn't announce itself. Others fall away. That's part of the cost. When you become unreachable, you lose access to shallow approval. But what you gain is alignment. Your energy stays intact. Your focus sharpens. Your direction clears. You stop leaking power through over-explanation. You stop donating attention to people who never earned it. And something important happens. You become harder to manipulate. Not because you're defensive, but because you don't respond to emotional bait. Shame, guilt, and judgment only work on people who are still negotiating their identity. You've already decided who you are. And once that decision is internal, no one can revoke it. And this is not about becoming cold or cruel. It's about becoming self-defined. You still care. You still connect. But you don't hand your self-worth to the crowd. And that's the final shift. You don't fight shame. You outgrow it. You don't silence critics. You make them irrelevant. You don't prove your strength. You live it quietly. From here on, the rule is simple. If someone tries to shame you, don't react. Don't explain. Observe. Decide. Move forward. Because the moment you stop needing approval is the moment no one can use it against you. And that is real freedom.